Trump says the Strait of Hormuz remains open despite Iran tensions. The U.S. extends Lebanon's ceasefire by 45 days. And Arab ministers condemn Al-Aqsa storming. Good morning, everyone. It's 9 a.m. here in Cairo. You're watching Q News. I'm Henny Saif, and these are the news today. U.S. President Donald Trump said the Strait of Hormuz would remain open amid the continued tensions involving Iran. In an interview with Fox News, Trump said the United States would ensure that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon. He also stated that Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed on the need to prevent Tehran from obtaining such capabilities. Trump added that Washington did not require Chinese assistance regarding the Iran file or securing navigation through the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. president further said he was prepared to accept oil prices reaching $200 a barrel if necessary to stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons.
I have a very good relationship with President Xi and with China. And it sounds like something that doesn't mean anything, but it's everything in deal making.
Moreover, U.S. President Donald Trump said Chinese President Xi Jinping strongly agreed that Iran should not obtain a nuclear weapon. Speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One following his summit in Beijing, Trump said Xi shared Washington's position on preventing Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons and supported keeping the Strait of Hormuz open.
Smile. And on Taiwan, he doesn't want to see a movement for independence. He says, look, we've had it for thousands of years.
Reports indicated that Washington and Tehran may postpone discussions over Iran's highly enriched uranium stockpile to a later phase of negotiations. The Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said both sides had agreed to defer discussions on enriched uranium because the issue was, in his words, extremely complex. The remarks came after U.S. President Donald Trump said Washington was prepared to deploy American forces to secure the uranium at what he described as the appropriate time. Furthermore, the Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Tehran had received new messages from Washington expressing willingness to continue negotiations. Speaking in the Indian capital, Araghchi said that the United States had sent messages indicating readiness to maintain dialogue and diplomatic engagement with Iran. The Iranian Foreign Minister also said Tehran remained open to support from international partners, including China, as efforts continue to preserve negotiations amid regional tensions and disputes over the Strait of Hormuz.
So if they want to negotiate a solution, they have to be patient because it needs.
Footage showed vessels waiting near the Strait of Hormuz amid continued uncertainty over negotiations between Washington and Tehran. The slowdown comes as Iran appears to be tightening its control over the strategic waterway following stalled talks with the United States. Sources familiar with the matter said Tehran had reached agreements with Iraq and Pakistan linked to oil and liquefied natural gas shipments through the region. Iranian officials have increasingly described control of the Strait of Hormuz as a long-term strategic objective capable of boosting both economic revenues and political leverage. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi stressed the importance of keeping the Strait of Hormuz open during talks in the United Arab Emirates. Modi made the remarks during a meeting with the UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan in Abu Dhabi. The Indian Prime Minister said maintaining the Strait of Hormuz as free, open and safe remained a top priority for India amid rising regional tensions. Modi also emphasized that India continued to support dialogue and diplomacy as the preferred path for resolving regional disputes. And while diplomatic efforts and negotiations surrounding Iran and the Strait of Hormuz continue to dominate regional attention amid the fears of wider escalation, focus is also shifting westwards to Lebanon, where cross-border strikes, ceasefire talks and growing security concerns continue to keep the southern front highly volatile.
كل المستهدفين هن مدنيين.
وضع شيء مرعب، شيء بخوف.
Israeli strikes targeted areas in southern Lebanon as negotiations between Lebanon and Israel continued in Washington. Footage showed smoke rising from multiple locations in southern Lebanon following the strikes reported by Lebanon State News Agency. The attacks came as Lebanese and Israeli delegations entered a second day of negotiations in Washington aimed at advancing ceasefire and security discussions. Lebanese authorities said the death toll from Israeli strikes since March has climbed to nearly 3,000 people. Lebanon's Public Health Emergency Operations Center said almost 9,000 others had been wounded since the escalation began on March 2nd. Officials added that Israeli strikes on towns in the Tyre district wounded dozens more on Friday, including women, children, and medical personnel. Meanwhile, the Israeli military said it had struck more than 440 Hezbollah targets over the past week and killed more than 220 Hezbollah fighters. Israel also said Hezbollah launched projectiles towards Israeli forces in northern Israel during the same day. The United States announced a 45-day extension of the ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon. The U.S. State Department said the extension would allow additional progress in negotiations between both sides following talks held in Washington. American officials described the discussions as highly productive and confirmed that negotiations are scheduled to resume early June. Talks mark the third round of discussions since tensions sharply escalated after Hezbollah launched missiles towards Israel in March, prompting intensified Israeli airstrikes and expanded military operations in southern Lebanon. The United Nations said peacekeepers in southern Lebanon continue to record heavy military activity despite ongoing ceasefire efforts. The UN officials said the interim force in Lebanon documented hundreds of firing incidents attributed to Israeli forces alongside projectile launches by Lebanese non-state actors, including Hezbollah. According to the United Nations, Israeli military activity included airstrikes, armored movements, demolition operations and artillery fire across multiple sectors. The UN also accused Israeli forces of obstructing UNIFIL movements on 2 occasions, including an incident in which a tank reportedly pointed its weapon towards a convoy escorting the Lebanese Red Cross.
Also reported north of the Litani River and in western Bekaa. Peacekeepers reported 377 firing incidents attributed to the Israel Defense Forces and 15 trajectories of projectiles, area of operations, including multiple Israeli airstrikes in both sectors east and west. Airstrikes were also reported north of the Litani River and in western Bekaa. Peacekeepers reported 377 firing incidents attributed to the Israel Defense Forces and 15 trajectories of projectiles, area of operations, including multiple Israeli airstrikes in both sectors.
For more, we now move to Mona Msalhi in our newsroom. Mona.
Thank you so much, Hani, and good morning to you. For further analysis, we're joined from Cairo by International Relations Specialist Dr. Mohammed Osman. Good morning to you, Dr. Osman, and welcome to Qnews. And let me start by asking about the significance of the new 45-day extension of the ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel, and if that is expected to prevent a wider regional escalation.
Thank you for having me, Mona. Always a pleasure to be with you. Of course, the extension of the ceasefire does not come as a surprise, to be honest, since negotiations are ongoing between Israel and Lebanon under the auspices of the United States. It's only natural that this facade of a ceasefire would be maintained, even though, of course, we cannot really term what's happening as an actual ceasefire because it defies all the aspects of the definition of a cessation of hostilities, because basically, Mona, what we have in Lebanon is not a cessation of fighting, but we have is a low-intensity war of some sort. Israel is continuing its military operations in Lebanon, bombarding different parts of Lebanon, advancing on the ground and capturing more territories. And since this ceasefire has been enacted, hundreds of Lebanese have been killed in Israeli strikes and attacks and violations. And Hezbollah, in return, is resisting these Israeli violations and responding to them in turn. So basically, we have a war going on in Lebanon. They just choose to call it a ceasefire and scale down the scale of hostilities. However, it is better than nothing. It is better than an all-out conflict or a higher intensity war inside Lebanon, even though I'm very pessimistic about the outcomes of these negotiations, because Israel negotiates with nothing but bad faith as of late. However, at the same time, having some sort of pathway for a permanent settlement that preserves the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Lebanon is something that should be at least pursued and attempted before giving up on the negotiations, I believe. So the extension serves to allow the negotiations to continue, even though the United States has refused to commit to stopping Israel's violations and has not done nothing justify the violation, saying that Hezbollah refuses to be disarmed, so therefore they have it coming, basically.
But then, as you said respectively here, that Washington is in the middle the midst of those talks. So do you think Washington involvement would indicate a serious political track, or is it just a merely temporary effort to contain tensions at this particular stage?
Unfortunately, Mona, it's probably a temporary measure by the Americans just to score political points and to scale down the conflict in the Middle East, because they want to scale down the conflict in the Middle East at this point. That doesn't mean that the United States is committed to a just peace in Lebanon. Far from it, because basically what is being required from Lebanon at this point is to basically engage in a conflict with one of its internal components, and that is Hezbollah. We all have our reservations on how Hezbollah conducts itself, on its relations with Iran, on how it jeopardizes the authority of the Lebanese state. Yet at the same time, dealing with the issue of disarming Hezbollah and allowing the Lebanese state to monopolize the possession of arms can only be achieved through an internal political dialogue in Lebanon, and not through any foreign dictation of some sort, or not through, definitely not through an Israeli military intervention. And what unfortunately is being asked of the Lebanese government in return for an Israeli withdrawal and upholding of the ceasefire, and maybe even a security agreement or even a peace agreement, is that the Lebanese government must undertake forcefully and immediately and promptly the disarmament of Hezbollah, something that the Lebanese government is not ready to do under these conditions, because it will basically lead to a civil war in Lebanon. So I do not see that the United States is dealing with this realistically, let alone seriously, and I believe that they are only attempting to scale down the conflict in the region. If they achieve even a distorted peace settlement in Lebanon that cannot even stand the test of time but survives for a couple of years, so that President Trump would claim that he ended his 17th war, then maybe this would stand. However, in terms of sustainability and long-term strategic thinking for U.S. policy in the Middle East and peace in the Middle East, I do not believe that these negotiations will yield anything sustainable or meaningful.
Then we're speaking also about the Israeli strikes, as you said, respectively, the before and Hezbollah activity. So what does that reveal about the fragility of the agreement that is already existing?
There is no agreement, basically, Mona. There is a ceasefire at the moment, and there are certain understandings, and this ceasefire is not even being upheld or implemented. As we've said, the Lebanon is still active and going and up and running, just on a lower intensity. We cannot seriously call this or classify this as a ceasefire. And all of the agreements, whether of the 2024 ceasefire agreement or with the 2026 ceasefire agreement, Israel has violated each and every clause of these agreements and has worked tirelessly to show us new ways and methods of violating ceasefires and not upholding or respecting them. So this is the sad reality that we are facing in Lebanon. And unfortunately, this situation could lead at some point, once again, to a wider conflict in Lebanon erupting. We have seen this happen in 2026 because in 2024, in November 2024, when a ceasefire was reached, it was not respected by the Israelis, and for over 400 days, it was systematically violated by the Israelis. And therefore, at the nearest episode of regional stability, when the Iran war started in February 2026, war in Lebanon erupted immediately and the ceasefire collapsed. So basically, the situation in Lebanon will always be susceptible to and vulnerable to episodes of regional instability that will make Lebanon once again one of the theaters of conflicts by proxies between regional and international powers, just as it has been for the entirety of its modern history, sadly, Mona.
Mm-hmm. That was the International Relations Specialist, Dr. Mohammed Osman. We thank you so much for your insights and definitely for your time. And thank you so much for joining here on Q News. Now we go back to Hani Saif in our studio. Hani.
Thank you, Mona. As tensions persist along Lebanon's southern border, despite the ongoing negotiations and the ceasefire efforts, the humanitarian and security situation in Gaza continues to deteriorate, with renewed strikes, mounting casualties, and growing international concern over conditions inside the Strip. Demonstrations and public gatherings were held in multiple cities to mark the 78th anniversary of the Nakba. Participants raised Palestinian flags and banners expressing support for Gaza and the right of return to Palestinians. Speakers at the events linked the Nakba anniversary to the continued displacement of Palestinians and the destruction caused by the war in Gaza, while calling for ongoing international solidarity with the Palestinian people. Arab foreign ministers condemned the storming of Al-Aqsa Mosque by what they described as an extremist Israeli minister under Israeli police protection. The Arab League Ministerial Council rejected Israeli actions inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, including the raising of Israeli flags and what it described as provocative rituals during the 78th anniversary of the Nakba. Arab ministers warned that Israeli policies aim to alter the historical and legal status of Jerusalem and impose new realities in the occupied city. The statement also reaffirmed that Al-Aqsa Mosque across its full area of 144 condemns is an exclusive place of worship for Muslims under the custodianship of the Jordanian Islamic Waqf administration and the Hashemite guardianship over holy sites in Jerusalem. Israel announced the killing of Hamas military wing commander in Gaza, Izzeddin al-Haddad, during a strike on the Strip. The Israeli media said the operation targeted a residential apartment in Gaza City's Remel neighborhood. Palestinian sources, meanwhile, reported that 7 people were killed in the strike, including 3 women and a child, while more than 50 others were wounded.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
If you look at that, or we're out.
The European Union urged Kosovo's political leaders to form a stable government amid warnings that major financial support could be at risk. EU Enlargement Commissioner Marta Koz said Kosovo needed to restore political and administrative stability as the country faces the possibility of a third election in just over a year.
There is a
Speaking
credible
alongside
European
caretaker
perspective
Prime Minister Albin Kurti in Pristina, Koz stressed that Kosovo still had what she described as a credible European future. The European Union warned that continued instability could jeopardize more than $1 billion in development and growth funding. The World Health Organization said it is working with the Democratic Republic of Congo to contain a new Ebola outbreak in the country's east. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said the organization would deploy resources to help stop the spread of the virus and support affected communities. Tedros also announced the immediate release of $500,000 from the WHO Emergency Contingency Fund to support the response operation.
The outbreak is a reminder of the persistent threat to human health of disease outbreaks and the importance of
A leading Japanese snack company announced plans to temporarily switch some of its colorful packaging to black and white to conserve raw materials. Tokyo-based Calbee said the move would affect 14 products, including potato chips and breakfast cereals, beginning later this month. The company said the decision was aimed at maintaining stable shipments, as supplies of certain oil-derived materials remain affected by regional tensions linked to the Iran conflict. Printing ink relies on naphtha, a petroleum product for which Japan depends heavily on Middle East imports.
インクあるいはナフタについて、現時点では直ちに供給上の問題が生じるとの報告は受けておらず、日本全体として必要。
Indonesia's first giant panda born in the country is preparing to make its public debut later this month. The panda, named Satrio Wiratma, was born last November at Taman Safari Indonesia in West Java. Zoo officials said the cub is growing well and remains in good health ahead of his official public appearance. Satrio Wiratama was born to a pair of giant pandas loaned to Indonesia by China as part of a conservation cooperation program. A South Korean entertainment company opened a robot-themed park in Seoul, featuring humanoid robot performances and interactive attractions. The park, launched by Galaxy Corporation, includes robot boxing matches and K-pop performances carried out by humanoid robots. The company's CEO said the project was designed to introduce children to a future in which robots become part of everyday life. The attraction aims to combine entertainment and technology through interactive experiences centered on robotics and artificial intelligence. Hollywood actor John Travolta received a surprise Lifetime Achievement Award at the Cannes Film Festival. Festival organizers presented Travolta with the honorary award in recognition of his decades-long career in cinema. A surprise tribute took place during this year's Cannes Film Festival collaborations, attended by filmmakers and international stars from around the world. These are all the news we have for now, but before we go, let's take a look at the top stories making the news today. Trump says the Strait of Hormuz remains open despite Iranian tensions. The U.S. extends Lebanon ceasefire by 45 days. And Arab ministers condemn Al-Aqsa storming. That brings us to the end of this news bulletin. Thank you for watching Q News, your window to the latest developments from across the region and around the world. And stay tuned for more coming up. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.